my friends, welcome to FHP Books. I am Felix and today I want to talk about Santo movies, about the movies of the wrestler with the silver mask. Santo is a very popular character in Mexico. Santo became an iconic figure, a very charismatic figure of Mexican cinema, and now he's internationally known. He's a very popular figure for all Spanish-speaking world and of course particularly for his home country, Mexico. Rodolfo Guzmán Huerta, which was his real name, he came from a poor background, from a tough neighborhood in Mexico City. He was raised up there and later he started participating in wrestling and he was very successful. He overcame this poor background, he overcame these tough times. He became a very successful sportsman. That was also an inspiration for a lot of young boys, for a lot of young teenagers in Mexico that had a similar background like himself. So by fighting in these wrestling contests, in these wrestling competitions, he became an idol. He became an idol for a lot of young boys, for a lot of young teenagers that were also coming from some difficult backgrounds, from some difficult neighborhoods in Mexican cities. So he was like a mentor, like a father figure, or like an older brother for these kids. So later his popularity was more and more growing, and at first he became a comic star. He became a star of comic books that were published in Mexico in the 50s with him as a protagonist. And we must remember that in Mexican wrestling, there is this tradition of the mask, of the masked wrestlers. And with this mask, these wrestlers have like an aura of secrecy, of mystery, of enigma. They are like very, very mysterious characters. And in this context, we can also understand why many of these wrestlers became like legendary figures among society, like kind of superheroes. They became in the popular mind, in the popular culture, in the pop culture of Mexico, these wrestlers, for these kids, for these teenagers, they became like superheroes. They were superheroes. And first, these comics started, these comics about them, and of course Santo was the most popular. And in these wrestling contests, in these wrestling competitions, there were usually one was the good guy and one was the bad guy in the competition, in the fight, and one incarnated the good and the other incarnated the evil. So there is even a metaphysical context in these competitions, in these Mexican traditional wrestling competitions. So there is at first this aura of mystery, this aura of enigma and secrecy about the identity of the wrestler, and on the other side there is also these different characters that this masked wrestler have, because one of the character is like a good guy, the other is like the bad guy. For instance, Santo means of course saint, the saint, so a very good guy, a very good positive character. Like there are others, like for instance Blue Demon, and he is like a devil, incarnating a devil, even if he also later became a good guy. He was also a good guy in the movies. He was also an actor later. He became also very popular in Mexico, Blue Demon. But at the beginning, in the context of this wrestling competitions, Blue Demon was the evil character in the wrestling, in this set, in this, because it was like a theater, it was like a competition, it was a show. It was not only sport, it was of course sport, competition, wrestling, martial arts, but at the same time it was a show, and one was the good guy, the other was the bad guy, and the public was divided. Some of them were like cheering the good guy, the others were cheering the bad guy, and so on. And they have a lot of interesting names, these wrestlers, like the El Médico Asesino, the Killer Doctor, or something like that. No, every Mexican wrestler has a very interesting name. So Santo was one of the pioneers when this popularity started, this great popularity of masked wrestling in Mexico, that was at the same time sport, at the same time martial arts, and at the same time it was a show. So afterwards, when Santo became so popular, the first thing that came to the popular culture of him was comics, and later the movies came. Later started the movies. The first movies were shot in the end 50s. They came later to the screens in the beginning of the 60s, but they were shot in the end 50s in Cuba, actually, in Cuba, before the Castrist revolution came, before Fidel Castro took the power in Cuba. Before that, some Mexican film team was there shooting the first Santo movies. The first Santo movies where our Santo character was still not the protagonist. He was like an important figure in the plot, he was an important figure in the story, but he was not the main protagonist in these two movies. And these two movies are a little bit chaotic, they are a little bit strange in some aspects, the plot, but they are interesting to see for an historical perspective. They are interesting to see for somebody who is interested in this saga. So, and later the most important Santo movies came in the 60s and in the 70s. These are the most important decades where Santo movies were very popular in all Mexico. And in my opinion, it's interesting to point out that Santo has a similarity in his character with Rocky Balboa the boxer, who was also, he's a fictional character played and invented by Sylvester Stallone, but the parallelisms, the similarities between Rocky and Santo, in my opinion, are very interesting, because also Rocky was also a poor kid from some tough neighborhood in Philadelphia. Rocky was a guy from the streets, and he was a poor guy, and thanks to his willpower, thanks to his discipline, thanks to his love for sports, he overcame these difficulties, he overcame this past, and he became a very successful man, a very successful guy who was also an idol for younger generations. So that's a parallelism with Santo that not many people have pointed out. As far as I know, I think it's interesting to point this out, at least, and also, of course, to point out the more obvious similarities between the Santo character and